Okay, folks, we're going to get started with the analysis of part six. Sorry it took so long. Um, this is going to be a little dense, a little deep. He skates over it, but we're going to try our best to get through it. He's talking about a lot of ideas. Okay, he's going to talk about the shift to the ideas that actually coalesced in the 20th century. With a lot of what America embraces, and it started with these particular traits and then diffused outward, as he says. Okay, we're going to start with basically the birth of liberalism. Okay, he says the 19th century is marked by by the belief in the goodness of man, secularism, belief in progress, liberalism, capitalism, faith in science, democracy, and nationalism in these particular steps. And this all, what we think of is left and right and liberal and conservative. This is all 20th century liberalism starting from the 19th century. With our founding father, John Stuart Mill, and Thomas Jefferson and John Stuart Mill, and says the belief in the innate goodness of man had its roots in the 18th century, when it appeared that man was born good and free, but everywhere distorted and corrupted, enslaved by bad institutions and conventions. And they felt if only man could be freed from the corruption of society and its artificial conventions, freed from the burden of property, of the state, of the clergy, of the rules of matrimony, then man, it seemed clear, could rise to heights and undreamed of before, could indeed become a kind of Superman, practically a god. So like he says, it was a spirit that prompted the outbursts of self-reliance and optimism so characteristic of the whole period from 1770 to 1914, including the robber barons, including monopoly capitalism, that kind of stuff. It's the whole spirit of the rugged individual. Remember Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders? He was characteristic of that kind of that kind of spirit. Here, if you ever read Ayn Rand, here's a quote. Here's a quote that would, basically, resonate with her. Man can accomplish most by service to himself and devotion to the goals of this world. And they said, thus came the triumph of secularism. You ever wonder where secularism came from? And that's where it came from. See, here's more of these so-called, what we call conservative ideas, and they're actually liberal ideas. See, closely related to the 19th century beliefs that human nature is good, that society is bad, and that optimism and secularism were reasonable attitudes that were certain theories about the nature of evil. Just as the negative idea of the nature of evil flowed from a human belief that human nature was good, so the idea of liberalism flowed from the belief that society was bad. For if society was bad, the state, which was the organizing, coercive power of society, was doubly bad. And if man was good, he should be freed from, above all, the coercive power of the state. Who does that sound like? That sounds like conservatives, right? But this is liberalism. Got to remember. Here's another so-called conservative idea that's actually liberalism. In its narrowest aspect, liberalism believed that the economic activities of man should be freed completely from state interference. This latter belief is summed up in the battle cry, "No government in business," commonly called laissez-faire liberalism. What does that sound like? It sounds like the Republicans, doesn't it? So the Republicans are actually liberals. They're not conservative. It's not classic conservatism. This is classic liberalism. Don't be fooled. Okay, here quickly says, from either aspect, liberalism is based on an almost universally accepted 19th century superstition known as the community of interest. It maintained that in the long run, what was good for one member of society was good for all, and that what was bad for one was bad for all. Okay, he says that the implied corollaries in the 19th century with the community of interest is that human abilities are innate and can only be distorted or suppressed by social discipline, and that each individual is the best judge of his own self-interest. He said all these together form the doctrine of the community of interest, a doctrine which maintained that if each individual does what seems best for himself, the result in the long run will be best for the whole society. And that's what was held up until 1914, which is World War I. Liberalism and the community of interest and the belief in progress led to almost inevitably to the practice and theory of capitalism. Okay, here's the definition, and you're going to see this later on in the book. Capitalism was an economic system in which the motivating force was the desire for private profit as it determined by a price system. You're going to see this come up over and over again when he talks about capitalism and the economic system. So, keep that as a definition. Okay, here in the last part, we're going to talk about this is nationalism is, in my opinion, is a modification of laissez-faire liberalism or the rugged individualism. He said the last attribute of the 19th century, by no means the least, is nationalism. And he defines it as a movement for political unity with those whom we believe are akin. As such, nationalism is the 19th century had a dynamic force which worked in two directions. On the one side, it served to bind persons of the same nationality together into a tight, emotionally satisfying unit. On the other side, it served to divide persons of different nationality into antagonistic groups. Like I said, you can see this in a united Germany. You can see this in Japan. You can also start to see it in England or the UK. In the 19th century, as we started to break up into distinctive political units. Okay, here he's talking about how those eight core beliefs of the 19th century in liberalism or in laissez-faire liberalism and the power of the individual, and then the collective individual as far as nationalism had a rude awakening with the two world wars. And said of these shattering experiences, the chief trauma of the First World War and the long drawn out agony of the Depression and unprecedented violence of the Second World War. Of these, the First World War was undoubtedly the most important. To a people who believed the innate goodness of man in inevitable progress in the community of interest and the evil as merely the absence of good, the First World War, with its millions of persons dead and its billions of dollars wasted, was a blow so terrible to be beyond human ability to comprehend. As a matter of fact, no real success was achieved in comprehending it. The people of the day regarded it as a temporary, inexplicable aberration to soon be ended. In other words, they wanted to go back. They wanted to go back pre-World War I, and they wanted to recreate what they had in the 19th century, before 1913. And all it did was mask the facts of what happened, and they weren't able to correct their mistakes, and it caused a Second World War. And I said this new world, the child of the period between 1914 to 1945, assumed its recognizable form only as the first half of the century drew to a close. In contrast with the 19th century belief that human nature is innately good and society is corrupting, the 20th century came to believe that human nature is, if not innately bad, at least capable of being very evil. So in other words, it was deemed to be very evil. And he says, left to himself, it seems today man falls very easily to the level of the jungle or even lower. And this result can be prevented only by training and the coercive power of the state. That's why now you get state education. That's why you get state welfare. That's why you get tightly controlled state programs. So this is the extreme of liberalism. This is the socialist agenda that came out of the two world wars. It said associated with these changes are a number of others. The belief that human abilities are innate and should be left free from social duress in order to display themselves has been replaced by the idea that human abilities are the result of social training and must be directed to socially acceptable ends. Thus, liberalism and laissez-faire are to be replaced apparently by social discipline and planning. The community of interest would appear if men were merely left to pursue their own desires have been replaced by the idea of the welfare community, which must be created by conscious organizing action. In other words, now we have the planned state. And said the old march of democracy now yields to the insidious advance of authoritarianism, and the individual capitalists of profit motive seems to be replaced by state capitalism of the welfare economy, which is the monopoly capitalism, the corporate capitalism that we see today, where you have to organize people. People can't be left to themselves. So I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to I'm going to play a clip from Carol Quigley from one of his classes talking about liberals and conservatives. It's an eye-opening piece. Stay tuned.
So you ask, why is this? Notice, I told you, the liberals want to destroy communities and create isolated individuals. Like that judge in Boston who took yesterday over of Boston High School. He, the judge, going to run his house. The conservatives want to reduce government expenditures. Remember the system I put up here. Government, corporations, the field of action, communities, individuals. And they all act in the field of action, which is public decision-making. Corporations and the corporation people want to destroy government. You see Jerry Ford constantly saying we must reduce the role of government. The Secretary of the Treasury is committed to reducing the role of government to nothing if possible, because he's a devoted disciple of Ayn Rand. Devoted, and of course, personal friend. They're going to reduce government to almost nothing. And that's what the conservatives are doing. The liberals want to destroy communities, like this guy. If you destroy both government and communities, what you really is corporations and atomized individuals. And that's what they're working for. It won't work. For this reason, you cannot retain law and order with atomized individuals. Even if they finish this metro subway system, 30 people never go on it, will not be safe. You can only control human behavior by internalized controls, not by externalized controls. And you can only get internalized controls in communities. So what we have is the conservatives and the liberals are both working for the same goal, to reduce our society's atomized individuals. And they will then be subject to corporations at a subsistence level. We'll never get that far. Because you can always opt out. You can always start eating organic food and doing things that are important.